Hello, to whom it may concern, I'm going to attempt to briefly go over um, or just provide the second installment of what I said I would do with regards to this email that I sent out to very specific people for very specific reasons within the GSD community. And to start, I will just say, I'll just read the email briefly. Good afternoon, Diversity Cabinet. I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing about a matter that concerns everyone in our collegiate community. I aim to call in the GSD administration, the people behind all diversity, inclusion, and belonging efforts, the Diversity Cabinet, and anyone behind the disability efforts within the GSD. I'm asking for an immediate pause of the unassigned desks lottery so we can discuss equity and process. I aim to seek and facilitate a positive but effective mediation with the entire GSD cabinet and student forum and people in administration to address my observations, concerns, and experiences over the last few days, which was now at this point last week during my midterms. I will provide the dates as to when that happened later. But before coming to the GSD, I understood that there was a culture of distrust and lack of transparency between students, faculty, and admin. Now, as a student, I can see where these things play out, and I want to call attention to the issues at hand and use my facilitation skills that I've gained as being an organizer and facilitator and activist with the Zionist protests. I will send a follow-up email on Monday after midterm due to workload constraints as to why I am bringing this up and showcase the documentation surrounding these circumstances. It is no longer Monday, and that is okay. I'm extending myself the grace to send this not on Monday and submit it in a different format than which I originally said I would have. So I want to go over some quick objectives. I want to demonstrate what harm that was caused by the institution, what it looks like in real time, and how destabilizing it could be. I would like to rectify the harm done and demonstrate that only a portion can be rectified and that there will always be an underlying healing journey that the harmed has to process and come to terms with. I want to showcase the greater context of spatial and structural violence within this GSD. I also want to subvert white supremacy in design pedagogies. And I also, again, to reiterate, want to call in the GSD administration and facilitate a discussion to analyze this overarching culture of distrust and lack of transparency in hopes to create more and more transparent process. And, just off of the riff, like these four, I feel like are definitely overarching issues within the GSD. But I feel like other people could definitely have reasons as to why the GSD falls under the rest of them. And I'm just gonna read this quick quote that was captioned underneath this Instagram post. Change is easier when one knows what to change. We first get familiar with the unhealthy, oppressive, violent ways of being and thinking. Then we start training on being and responding differently. And again, this is just a basic list of how we might start to uproot and subvert on our way to dismantling white supremacy. Just quickly, I want to articulate where I'm coming from. We all know that from Designers Protest, I played integral roles in a lot of the things that Designers Protest has released and or used as tools to help get our message across to the masses. I also played a very huge role in all coordination and care efforts with regards to collective care, especially the community agreements to which we use to conduct ourselves together in our designs or in the design advocacy activism space. One moment. I just want to articulate where I'm coming from, just to get back into it. Sorry about that pause. So I got into Harvard and it caused a lot. I had to do a lot of reflecting as to basically knowing that I was willingly going back into an institution or institutions that cause harm, especially after leaving several of them, especially in former workplaces, such as Sasaki. You can read this report more in depth surrounding those harms caused to me. Anyone who read my application will know that my portfolio was definitely a therapeutic and healing process for me when applying to Harvard, and the fact that I've been documenting this healing journey since getting accepted into Harvard, and then like processing all of that, to which I've definitely opened up more to, and that the fact that this can be attributed to a reflective practice, which I can go into more depth later. And I'm learning about this terminology in class, and it's very applicable to me and what I already do. And yeah, so I do want to also acknowledge the negotiations that occur between me and the GSD. I have articulated for financial aid, as well as academic accommodations, which like allowed me a chance to address my psychological and mental and medical concerns and issues in a meaningful way that I've never been able to do for a variety of reasons. And that although I am putting myself in a position to be critical of the GSD, I also want to acknowledge where I'm coming from. So yeah. And I also want to point out the recognition and the representation of the work that I do, and then also the work that Design as Protest does, because it's used as reference material within some of my classes, and how some of these recognitions and the work that I do is now being put out into the public. There's also an article that I did about collective care that I just forgot to put the image in. And I want to also point out the relation and application of overlapping themes for the coursework, and just like, you know, key points and how they kind of all relate to one another, especially with regards to the actors and the stakeholders, which is like all of us. Oh, one moment. I also want to point out certain instances in which, you know, care becomes design and care becomes protest within my own personal work, as well as within Design as Protest. I'm not going to zoom in because I did not finish crossing out all of the personal information. So I have to do that for these last two boards so that there is anonymity, and I am also honoring my community agreements, which is like what's said in here stays in here. I believe that, of course, I can share the process in which we do things and how. I just want to also keep their personal thoughts that they've shared with me safe. So I'll fix that later. But also just want to like articulate that, like, you know, I've been doing my own separate work with regards to, you know, care and trying to help empower the youth and grant them autonomy over themselves and the issues that are important to them. And these are just like a bunch of affirmations that are necessary and that ground me in why I'm doing this. Feel free to read them. Some of these people are also connected to Harvard in some way, shape, or form, and I work closely with them on other things. And this is even a picture of someone's desk in the GSD that I walked by. So I want to get into the timeline of what actually happened. But before I start, I definitely want to make a few like checkpoints that I need people to notice and acknowledge. Is that the location in which the harm happened is in the LA Core 3 trays. There are 2 unassigned desks in the 4th trays in this specific pod. I acknowledge that I'm a concurrent MDes and MLAD first year student, and the fact that the normal trajectory would have been to start MLAD first, but I articulated that I wanted to start MDes first because it was my whole reason of coming here. And we all know that MDes people don't get, any sense of permanence with regard to permanent desks because they're not allowed to take studios. And I also want to acknowledge that within the first 4 weeks of class, half of which was hybrid, but I still had to come into class for my pro seminar. So for the first 4 weeks, I did try the nomadic style. I did try to try that different learning style, and ultimately decided that it wasn't the best for me. And I eventually decided to set up camp here in this area because it was unoccupied and I needed some sort of permanence. So yeah, so on the start of Tuesday, the space looked like this, and I was sitting at the desk just doing work and preparing for finals. And I had an interaction with administration, to which that person came over and was trying to understand which desks were which, to which I immediately responded. I think it's also important to note that this person already seemed aggravated or agitated because of probably whatever conversations were going on behind the scenes. They came over to me and they already had this notion that this was going to be a difficult interaction, and their voice I perceived as being brass with me. Now, when they came over to figure out what desks were which, I immediately responded, yes, I'm sitting at one of them. I know that this is MLA Core 3. Like, I acknowledge this to this person, and I was like, yeah, I don't sit here. I'm just like MDes, MLAUD, and the space was unassigned, so I'm taking up space here. Like, I acknowledge that from the beginning, to which that person tried to like iterate that they were going to put label on the desk and all these other things. And I'm trying to get a better sense of the picture and be like, okay, that's fine. But why? Why are we doing this? Can I know why? This person could not articulate to me why. They just could not. I was asking all the questions and they couldn't answer them. Either they couldn't or they didn't want to. I'm not 100% sure. But I eventually got some explanation that there was going to be a lottery. And I was like, oh, that's great. I was so excited. Like, oh my God, I want to contribute to this process. And I posed the question, okay, how can I do that? Again, I was met with like the answers of not really wanting to either answer, or either that process wasn't figured out yet. So now I'm starting to ask questions. I'm like, does student forum know about this? Am I the first person to know about this? You know, did we think about the considerations of other people from marginalized communities to be prioritized in this supposed lottery? So those are the questions I had immediately upon this interaction. I want to articulate that through that dialogue, the crumpling of the index and the newspaper on the wall above the 2 trash receptacles and recycling receptacles was pulled back so that I was made aware that this was an LA Core 3 space, which I'd already articulated in the beginning. I perceived that as aggressive, to which then this person asked for the other space, where the other space was. And as you can see in this picture, there was a lot of, this was the other desk that was unassigned, that was being occupied by another student who is assigned to the pod in the area, but that desk was unassigned, and this person just naturally spread out as one would when they have extra space. So I told them, yes, I'll take you to the other desk, it's right here. And then I was like, oh, okay, I don't know where this person is. Um, maybe we should, tell them before moving their stuff. Again, this person from administration, I guess, decided in that moment that, and of course, I'm like, yes, I acknowledge that I'm like putting emotions and stuff on them, but this is how I'm perceiving the actions. But anyway, this person from administration proceeded to just move all of this person's belongings and put it on their assigned desk. And I want to point out that like the moving of these things was noticed by the pod the next day, the people in the pod, and the people were questioning like what happened. I also want to articulate that like at this point, I still didn't have a clear answer as to how I could participate in this lottery, and I was still trying to get that answer out of them. So I kept asking. I eventually got my answer, and they and I was like, okay, thank you, thank you. I was like really appreciative that I could have the answer of the person who I needed to talk to, so I could do what I needed to do to allocate for myself with regards to desk lottery, even if it wasn't originally supposed to be considered. I also want to note that the notice that was pasted on my desk and the post-it note that was moved in order to make that happen, you can see this was the original location of where it was. And then this is the way that it was after it happened. So that post-it was moved over and this was pasted there. My original reaction to it was like, is what I'm doing not considered academic? I was also posed with that question. So the next day, again, following up from the questions of, did other students know in advance, like the student forum or even MDES liaisons? So I started to ask people who held those positions, to which the general consensus was that by Tuesday, no, they did not know that. So I was the first student that did know that. And by Wednesday, it's the next day, I'm like halfway through drafting the email response that I was going to send to you all or whoever's watching this first. And obviously, over the course of events, that original email was not the email you all got. So I needed to craft my response with my initial reactions to a lot of things. And one moment. And I was just trying to process and synthesize everything, right? With regard to my experience, right? So I'm like looking up, like if they're creating, or if they're supposed to be, if a diversity cabinet exists and their mission is to engage student and faculty and staff in supporting diverse intellectual and social climate in alignment with this mission, it provides a strategic consultation around concerns that impact inclusivity and belonging for all members of the GSD. These concerns include, but not limited to, recruitment, retention, curriculum, communications, media, public events, and the cabinet's consultation seeks to advance a welcoming environment for individuals of varied abilities, backgrounds, beliefs, cultures, identities, races, lived experiences, perspectives, and values. If that were true, I was treated with everything but from that main interaction. And I want to also point out that previously the students were given basically a formal boundaries in which how we have to interact with each other. Of course, with respects to COVID and vaccine status and our masks, we all adhere to them. But this second installment, I have to probably articulate that by Wednesday. The day is happening. I have deadlines. I'm not worried about this email or that I have to type to send to articulate for myself, because I also just want to submit my project. And we got an email by the evening time describing how we can submit a ticket for the lottery. I want to articulate that this email was very vague. It did not provide that much description as to the process of how it happened, why, or who knew in advance. It is my knowledge that by the time this email was sent out, the student forum had been informed, but not prior to me knowing. I want to articulate a little point in which, like, again, more parameters are set for which we are required to engage in this space again, with the fact that up to 2 people will be assigned per desk, with the expectation that one person uses the desk at a time. If entering as an individual, this means that you will be asked to share with another person. Of course, anyone assigned must follow guidelines regarding to COVID. Yes, we knew that. But what has happened, like in the formal and informal space after these parameters are set, are a little contradictory. And what I mean by that is that, we have contact tracing and assigned seatings, and they do serve their purpose, yes. But I also want to highlight that you further strip away autonomy by continuing to insist on how we should function in the informal space and in the in-betweens of classes. I also want to highlight the fact that, yes, we have assigned seating, but most of the classes, at least I am, require some form of collaborative work, which requires me to sit next to the people that I wasn't sitting next to on day one. And the fact that Chow House has now become, or from my perspective, has become also a large new collaborative space that people use informally for collaborative work. So there's a little bit of contradiction going on there. But overall, I wanted everyone to know that I did submit the ticket on Wednesday. And I submitted it on Wednesday because I knew that I had midterms and I was probably going to forget by Friday, which is when it was due. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to submit this ticket, go home, and then come back in the morning and finish writing this email. It's important to know that my mind was constantly on this email. So Thursday morning comes and I go over to the desk and I notice that all of the newspapers are taken down. Then upon further inspection, I realized that the pens were all still there, so that my posters weren't taken down, they were torn down. At this point, I am very, very, very upset and confused as to what has happened, and I don't understand why. And to give more context is that me personally, I've spent over 150 hours curating the Anti-Racist Design Justice Index and facilitating the group in order to do that, as well as the newspaper. The newspaper I had less of a primary role in, but nonetheless, the creation of both of these pieces was very emotional for me, to the point where they caused burnout, and to the point where I can't actually read them in my leisure because I wrote them, and they're very political in manner, and they mean a lot to me. Now, if you multiply that by the minimum amount of consistent team members that I had, it was varying between 6 to 10 other individuals, all with sliding scales with how much hours they committed to the curation of these tools. And some people worked just as much as me for the hour. So if you multiply that by at least 100, right, you start to accumulate all these hours and what this actually means. I want to highlight that at this point, I was incredibly hurt. At this point, I did not feel like I belonged in this space, and that somebody wanted me to be removed. I want to also articulate that not only did this hurt me, but this hurt the student that was actually assigned to this space. The newspapers that were hung up didn't monetarily or organizationally belong to me, they belong to that person. We both just agreed to pin them up in the space. So now there are technically three people being harmed directly or indirectly. And because I've actually had this happen to me before with regards to people taking down my stuff, I wanted to document all instances in which signage and postages and all of it were placed and situated throughout the entire trays. Because I didn't want to leave room for, the excuse of fire hazards or whatever. Most of the walls within GSD are made with the ability to pin up stuff on them. They have this material here. So again, it leads to me to like, why did this happen? I don't know why this happened. How can I go about fixing this? How can I don't know, correct that I've been wrong? So I just want to overview some of the harm and the possible ramifications that could have come from that. This definitely widened, just from my experience alone. Again, I'm really only speaking on my behalf, but how it fits into the larger context of the entire student body and the GSD community. How that there was a clear lack of transparency in the process, a widening of distrust, a violent and hostile education environment for me, decreased and no sense of belonging in me. I was directly displaced, directly just destabilized. The removal of political, private and public property without notice. The newspaper, it is positioned in this gray area of it's private because they were the ones that we chose to pin up and they were in the space. They're public because we want the newspaper to be used as a tool for the general public. It's political in nature already. And anybody could have gotten that newspaper. Even if they didn't want to pay for it, they could have just grabbed it. We had a stack that was also near where everything was papered up. We had a stack of newspapers there. So again, it's like there was no justification for why the poster signs were pulled down. Again, the harm to multiple students directly and indirectly, the devaluing of autonomy didn't even give me the notice or the chance to pull down the other ones. I was notified that I needed to clear the space by Friday, which I did, or Saturday, I can't remember. And also the erasure of just basically a Black body in a space for it to serve another purpose that was supposed to be, just a lot of erasure happening. I also want to note that there, again, with the studio culture, that happens. I just want to articulate that in just a very brief interaction that I've had. So I'm very open about my experiences in the space for obvious reasons, to which some professors have been checking in on me, whether they are my professors or not. To which I was just like, there's really not enough time to keep up with the workload, right? For me, if I had to quantify it, if GSD outputs 100% all the time, that then students are only functioning within 50 to 80% of that, and the retaining of that information is probably only 20% if it were to be healthy. I need to articulate that. To which that faculty responded, well, then you've come to the wrong place. I just want to position that as to what all of the things that can mean. Certain ramifications that could have happened, worst case scenario would have been like, I drop out, my grades start to slip. My grades aren't starting to slip, but this did impede on how I function in the space, and it has halted me being able to actually work on my actual classwork, right? Because this was more important to me. I would like to articulate that some immediate responses need to happen. The lottery desks, I already articulated that, but with regards to the newspapers specifically, they need to be replaced or returned or monetarily paid for the newspapers. And in the event that the administration does not know, I don't know what your response is going to be, that you do not know what happened to my and the other students' newspapers. I request that an investigation be started to figure out who did it and why. Talk to the student body, talk to the security people, sanitation workers, and figure out what happened. But I do expect for these to be returned in some way, shape, or form. Now, as I was reading all of this, I began to utilize the tools that were given to me or that I helped create to that anything that could have been looking for any way in which had the GSD taken previous action, they could have avoided this entire situation from happening. So in the academic portion of the index, I articulated instances of which this would have been relevant. And I started to notice that, we definitely didn't consider a lot of spatial values within these systems. And the same goes for the notes on credibility. I started to articulate and analyze that information too. Again, things to note is that the GSD has had previous interactions with designers protest beforehand with regards to workshops. And we facilitated space like within the GSD community already. And the fact that the GSD has a passive relationship in which like they follow us on social media, but they have not, as far as I can tell, as I'm recording this video, I'm not sure if the GSD has signed on to the anti-racist design justice demands, but I'm pretty sure the answer is no, because of just my overall inclination. And I do want to articulate that I have full explanations as to why I oppose these solutions, but I'm not providing them here because that would be then giving you all of the answers and not allowing a conversation and a dialogue to happen, which is what I want to demonstrate. So essentially, again, I want to talk about how we or create a place in which we can talk about how we allow students to articulate why they need a desk with regards to marginalization and representation and diffabilities. I want to assess how the role of the diversity cabinet could have better situated the administration in handling what has happened or prevent it. Assess how direct and immediate engagement of students could have also prevented this. I want to prompt a broader conversation around transparency, trust, and process, and how we might, begin to shift the way that we move and think to address the needs of the larger student body. Again, that relates to, some key components in a reflective practice. I want to critique how the GSD teaches speculative work around community engagement underpinnings, but does not allow or does not follow suit with internal structures. I want to discuss how we can make these private meetings more transparent. I have the suggestions. How might we begin to have trust form? If we were to address these issues, how can we assess and measure the rate of change for that trust and transparency? All of which I have my ideas about. And I want to talk about how we can challenge the issue of ego surrounding the larger context of design, but with acute consideration to how the inside of the GSD functions, especially with regards to the ideas of collaboration and anti-collaboration based off of like the words people say versus how we have to do it, and this whole sink or swim mentality. And the solutions that can be talked about in depth together so that we might brainstorm helps us demonstrate a transparent process, some of which attempts to invert the MDES model that was imposed on us and apply it to studio and how we might do that. Also talking about facilitating more accessible communication between students and administration. And this last part that I want to highlight just really describes how I was synthesizing all of this information and what happened to me. It's like, this is a candid response out of me via text. And I was just like, students and administration need to dispel the notion of dialogue as a contract, right? That it's fixed. Right? Communication has and forever will be fluid in negotiation. But there is so much lack of trust that I think admin is terrified to move in that direction, which is why I highlighted the fear of something in the very beginning. I highlighted some symptoms of white supremacy culture. And overall, because I'm always keeping it real, basically, I was just like, you reap what you sow, but there is a path to redemption. One of the decision processes that designers protest continuously follows time and time again, from the community agreements is that we move at the speed of trust. And with that being said, that's it. That's the video. That's the TikTok. That's a TED Talk. Well, the invitation to talk about the TED Talk. I will be providing a link to which people can view this board more in depth. And yeah. Stop share.